So, listeners and viewers, welcome back to the next episode of the podcast. I am delighted today to be joined by Angela Hollowell. Is that how you say your name, Angela? Yeah,
That's it. Yeah.
perfect. I got it first time. Angela, tell me about yourself. So, we obviously have connected on Substack, and I'm really interested to ask you some questions in a few minutes about some of the things you do. What do you do for listeners? How did you get to come to this point in life?
Yeah. So by trade, I'm a filmmaker, a writer, and a podcaster, and a photographer, but that sounds like a lot of words. So mostly I just say I'm a filmmaker and a writer. That's where most of my money comes from. Um, and I started writing Please Hustle Responsibly, which is a newsletter on Substack in late 2023. And I started writing Melanin MVP, which is a separate newsletter related to women's sports in the summer of 2024, around the Olympics timeframe. Please Hustle Responsibly is my main newsletter. It's where I take a lot of my big swings, a lot of my big risks, and it's where I've built my most consistent publishing cadence. So I publish typically 3 times a week, Monday, Thursday, Saturday, which is for most people absolutely insane. And I don't disagree. And I don't recommend starting 3 times a week if you can't maintain 3 times a week. So, but yeah, that's a newsletter for creative entrepreneurs where I talk about creativity, the business of creativity, my experience being a creative business owner, other stories of people who are creative business owners, and things of that nature.
Nice, really interesting. I love it. What brought you to Substack then? Why did you decide this was the place to be?
So I did start on Substack. I don't only publish on Substack anymore. Um, I came to Substack, I think, because of familiarity. Like I had known about Substack for a while. But by the time that I started publishing in 2023, it had really kind of made the transition into social media more than I anticipated. And so the ability to find other writers was really enticing to me. I had published a couple of articles on Medium, wasn't super in love with the platform, mainly just the lack of growth infrastructure. Like Medium isn't there to help you grow a newsletter email
Mhm.
list. Medium is there to help you publish and get your work out in front of as many people as possible and be SEO friendly and perhaps be known as a thought leader in that space. I think Medium was really good for that. I think Medium is still really good for that.
Mm.
But I think Substack, in terms of like actually owning my audience, Substack did a better job of that
Mm.
and connecting the newsletter to social. So at least sharing it made it sharing it easier. So that was kind of what drew me to Substack. The reason why I left Substack is because Substack is the best place to publish anything, and I do mean anything, video, audio, writing. Substack is your place. But in terms of like giving you the infrastructure to like grow and scale that operation beyond a team of one and giving you the data you need to know what members of your audience are more likely to buy, more likely to engage, what they're engaging with. Substack just really doesn't have those tools, and I still kind of maintain that today. I think it's incredible if you want to publish once and publish everywhere, but not so great if you actually want to use that data for
Mm.
anything useful in terms of like growing a business. And at the time, I was seeing just how stable creating and publishing newsletters made my business feel. Like I really felt like I could give a crap less about social media. Like I felt like I had a direct line to my audience, so social media didn't matter anymore. So I was like, okay, I want that stability, but this isn't the place that's going to give me the tools to like really have that long term.
Mhm. Yeah, I fully agree. My journey's been kind of similar in some respects. Like I was on Medium first and wrote there for a while in 2023 as well and joined Substack around that kind of time as well. And yeah, really did find that Substack felt like home. It felt like a place that it really ticked all the boxes for me and I really enjoyed being here. But I agree what you said about it doesn't really give you enough sort of data to go on a lot of the time in terms of your audience. Like it really it's great for publishing, it's great for getting stuff out there, but I would love it if Substack would develop more back end kind of stuff so that you could sort of see what works best and you can track things better, that sort of thing. But yeah, and you've got a podcast here as well on Substack. So tell me more about that. So is that something that you've done before you came to Substack, or is it purely on Substack?
Yeah, so I actually started Honey and Hustle in 2020. And
Mm.
so Please Hustle Responsibly was kind of a connection to Honey and Hustle, given the naming. Um, and so I wanted a companion newsletter to the podcast. But then the newsletter kind of took a life of its own. So I don't know if I did a good job, but
Brilliant. And what is your podcast about? So what's the format for it? Do you bring on guests or how does it work?
it's been a mix. It started as purely like a one-to-one business video podcast that everybody hates apparently. But then it transformed into, yeah, still one-to-one interviews, some co-hosted episodes, some solo episodes. I started to see that like, oh, after this many years, people are actually coming to the show in part to hear my perspective. Maybe I should like find ways to like inject more of myself into the show.
Mm.
So it's gone through a couple of iterations now for season 6 and year 6. Trying to be a little more sophisticated and mature in our approach to creating on the show. So for February, I've done some kind of challenge for February the past couple of years. And this year I did a book club thing. So I would
Mm.
like read a chapter, a couple of chapters from a book, and then share my reflections on like their significance to creativity and entrepreneurship.
Nice.
We're going to do some more like deep dive episodes where instead of maybe me doing a one-to-one interview, I'm doing like 3 interviews for an episode, almost like a journalist maybe,
Mm.
and then compiling the meat and potatoes of those episodes into a look into like a certain topic. Like for example, we're doing an episode on Little Washington, North Carolina. So, also for context for people listening, this is a show specifically on North Carolina business owners at the moment.
Okay.
So I want to look at different ecosystems, and one business doesn't represent an ecosystem. So I'm trying to get multiple perspectives of business owners in an area and kind of dissect what makes this business ecosystem so special, what makes it work, who are the backbones of this community, that sort of thing.
Brilliant. I love that idea. That's so cool. You mentioned there just kind of in passing that you've been injecting more of yourself, your personality into the podcast and people respond to that. How do you do that? So if someone is developing a podcast of their own and they want to put more of their own personality into it, how do they go about making that happen?
Yeah, one of the things that worked really well on the newsletter early on, that was kind of a departure from the show, was me sharing like specific business stories that either I had researched or that I had experienced. And so what I did was I think I just like repurposed one of those articles
Mm.
into an audio like version of that essentially. And people who I guess listen to audio, maybe the circle isn't as big as I would like because there are some people who listen, they're like, oh, I never heard this from you before. And like, that was really interesting.
Mm.
So I would say start there if you're writing first and you want to create a podcast, or even if you're writing in general. And some of your writing is more investigative or like looking at, like David, maybe other writers and what's making them write well, maybe sharing more of your own story
Mm.
as it relates to writing. I think that could be really helpful. Another area that's really cool is even when I'm doing interviews, when people will sometimes respond to me with interviews that they really liked or really enjoyed, one thing they'll say is, I really like this interview because this person brought out something in your story that you had not shared yet. So
Mm.
I think there's, even if you're doing an interview-based show, if you're doing it with guests that you have a really good rapport with or that you build a good rapport with, don't be afraid to share parts of your story as well, as long
Mm.
as it doesn't detract from the interview. So there are ways you can do it that feel low lift and not icky and super vulnerable for no reason, that still feel good and will serve your audience.
Nice. That's a brilliant advice, actually, for anyone doing a podcast. I love that so much. And if anyone's listening to this and they want to maybe follow that same kind of route and have a podcast as part of their publication or just in general, what's the best way to get started with that? So, what are like literally the first steps you should take if you're starting to plan a podcast?
Before you hit record, I feel like there's so much work that needs to happen in order to make sure that, again, this is something that you're going to stick to and really be interested in beyond like maybe 20 episodes. I
Mm.
think I see that a lot where people will be like, I love fashion, but then they get to episode 3 and they're like, well, maybe I don't like it as much as I thought because I don't want to keep doing this. And so I think like one, you have to pick something that is so specific that you're willing to go back to this like every week from a different angle, from a deeper angle, from a personal angle, and really be willing to like mix it up. I
Mm.
started the podcast interviewing North Carolina entrepreneurs. I ventured out of that a little bit because of the pandemic and because Zoom made interviewing anybody anywhere accessible. But as soon as it was safe for me to like be in person with people, I immediately went back to North Carolina.
Mm.
And I think like sometimes what you're drawn to will naturally come to you. And here I am on season 6, still only focusing on North Carolina. I could talk about them all day. And I think that is a fairly niche market, like only focusing on one state. And there's other ways to do that. Just saying that you have a podcast about writing probably isn't specific enough. What do you care about that they write about? Like, for example, David Perel's How I Write. He doesn't necessarily care about the business side of like, well, how much money did you make with this book? And, all he cares about the craft of writing.
Mm.
So there's different ways to be specific within a medium. And I think you just have to find like your weirdly nerdy obsession and really be comfortable like leaning into that for sure.
I love it so much. How many episodes do you do per season? You said you did 6 seasons. How many episodes is that?
I wish I had a good consistent number. I do not. Mostly just I've mostly just been going by like feel.
Mm.
Um, in the article that I wrote yesterday, and I did an audio version of that as well, which is also linked to the newsletter. Um, I kind of talk about the seasons as different eras. So
Mm.
basically, like each season for me, the season is over when I feel like I've accomplished the goal that I set out to do in that season, or I've learned what I wanted to learn with that season. And now I'm ready to like take a step back, review what I've learned, and see how I can bring that into the next slate of shows and programming.
Brilliant.
So for season 5, I felt like season 5 was over when I was finished with one-to-one interviews and said, okay, like I've done what I wanted to do with one-to-one interviews. I think I can do more with ecosystem level interviews and like narrative storytelling. I think I can do more with bringing my guest onto the show and making them a part of the show.
Mm.
I think I can do more with sound design and making this a little bit snazzier for people who just want to listen and don't want a video version of this. So there's a lot of things that I felt like happened behind the scenes of creating a podcast. It's not just like showing up for an interview, editing it, recording it, moving on. Like there's a lot of learning that happens over the course of time. And
Mm.
you want to take a step back to like put that towards the next season to keep making the show better. So I try to give myself natural breaks to do that.
Brilliant, brilliant. Do you think there's a big difference between doing a podcast episode over Zoom like this versus doing one live? And what is the real, you said you went straight back into doing live as soon as you can, and why was that the case for you?
The biggest thing that I've noticed, and this is again coming from my perspective as like being a documentary film creator and like doing a lot of sit-down interviews, when you're hosting an interview, like the rapport that you build and the time that you build it is so much faster.
Mm.
And again, because I was freelance and I was so like thinking about like, okay, a podcast guest may not be paying me, but they are sort of a client. So how do I create a really good client experience?
Mm.
And so I got like these coffee mugs with the show logo on them, and I would give those to them as a gift and be like, hey, do you need water or anything? I would bring them water, and then they would have something to sip out of when they're like on the show. So
Mm.
that was a cool visual element of like having that there. And then when people got to know me, they were super excited, which is cool, and they would like they would be more likely to share the show because they just like wanted to support me
Mm.
and wanted to support the show. I'm not saying it can't happen via Zoom, but I felt like the rapport was just different when you're seeing someone, you can touch them, you can hug them if you're comfortable. Nobody really hugs me, but if that's your thing, and you can provide a really good experience for them that does kind of feel like, oh, this is less of a business meeting, less of a place where I have to be super strict and more of a place where I can relax and be honest and feel safe that this person is gonna like safeguard my story.
Mm.
So yeah, it's more expensive to host an in-person episode, but the rewards are a lot higher in terms of like guests really being advocates of the show.
That's so cool. Yeah, amazing advice. I love that so much. I think definitely for me, if I wasn't over here in Northern Ireland, I could reach more people who I want to speak to in person, definitely would. So that's great advice. You mentioned again in passing, you just dropping these amazing little truth bombs into what you're saying, but you talked about being a film creator, being a film director as well. And I wanted to really ask you about that. So how did you get into that? What does it look like for you at the minute? And yeah, tell me all about it.
Yeah, I got into it as most people do by accident, and being vaguely naive about how much it costs to be a filmmaker. So I started off as a photographer. I was doing a lot of events. I was doing a lot of portrait type stuff. I was doing some weddings. And people kept asking me, this was 2016 for 2018. And this was around the time that like social media and video were like becoming more intriguing to people. And so people were naturally asking me, oh, you do photo? Can you also do video? Like, does your camera record? And
Mm.
people had gotten used to asking that question then. Um, and I would be like, it records. Does it record well? I have no idea. Like, I don't know. But I want to learn because people keep asking me.
Mm.
And at the time, from a business perspective, I was like, there's so few people who do photo and video really well. Like, if I could be someone who does photo and video really well,
Mm.
I could name my price. And
Mm.
so I looked at it almost as like a skill, just a skill to be learned rather than this like artistic pursuit.
Mm.
So I learned it as a skill, started getting hired as like a video editor and like video creator. Um, and then eventually started working with some nonprofits who really wanted to be in that documentary space. They wanted to tell stories about the organization and the people that they worked with. So I got into it that way. So nonprofit video storytelling mostly. As of right now, that was 2020 when I first started really getting hired for stuff like that. Now in 2026, just wrapped up a film festival circuit with an original documentary film that I did.
Nice.
Wrapped up our last film screening. It was an 18-month film festival run. Wrapped it up in Durham at the Hayti Heritage Film Festival. Had a really great time. And hopefully looking forward to releasing another one soon. But also looking forward to getting into writing some films and TV shows. So
That's
that's where it's at.
incredible. Brilliant. Amazing. What a great journey. I love that so much. What was your most recent piece about them? What was the sort of the topic?
Yeah, so the latest one was about a runner and a therapist from Durham who was racing or participating in a ride 10 years after her first time participating in it. So
Mm.
it's a journey of like, how has her journey gone from being a runner these last 10 years? How has her body changed? How has her relationship to the sport changed? And how is she
Mm.
training for this race? And is she going to be able to do better than she did the first time 10 years later? So,
Brilliant. That's amazing.
yeah.
And you talked about you want to start writing more stuff in terms of film. Is that like fiction sort of thing, or is it going to be more sort of documentary you're thinking of?
A little bit of both.
Mm.
So one of the docs that I'm in post-production on now, it is going to be more of a narrative, almost video journalism style documentary film.
Hmm.
There's going to be a lot of my voice coming in to talk about me researching this topic and speaking with experts and covering this big event. Um, but then the narrative, mostly TV, is just me writing. I think once you start writing, writing just, writing takes you. You don't take writing.
I
So
agree.
the bounds of what you end up writing are really not up to you at that point, as long as you just keep going. And
Mm.
so after writing for so many years, like somewhere at the end of 2024, so maybe a year into writing the newsletter, I was like, I think I want to write some TV shows. But I
Nice.
don't at present have time to write TV shows. So I need to create space in my life to have time to write TV shows. So that's what I've
Mm.
been doing for basically also around the same amount of time, around last 18 months. So,
Incredible. When you say TV shows, what sort of genre are you thinking of?
so one of them is a procedural drama. It's going to be about this alternative crisis unit that's in Durham. There are
Mm.
a few other cities that have them, and a lot of them are born out of the pandemic a little bit
Mm.
and out of a lot of the yes, mistrust, but also reality that police departments are just stretched too thin
Mm.
to handle certain things. So Durham, among other cities, created an alternative crisis unit, and I was fortunate enough to actually follow them on a freelance gig for another show
Mm.
that was working with the Marshall Project on what this alternative crisis unit looked like, how it was structured, how it was funded, how they hired people, how the community received them, how the police department received them, how they worked together with the police department to answer calls, that sort of thing. So I'm excited to make a show about that. I feel like there's a procedural about everything. There's a procedural about cops and SWAT and the FBI and firefighters and EMS. So why not this?
Mm.
So there's that. The second one is a drama, I guess you could say. It's not really a comedy, even though I do write comedy because I can't stand to see everything sad. But it's about women's basketball. It's about a women's basketball player who is coming into I guess you could say her prime playing years of maturity in the WNBA, just as the WNBA is becoming more and more mainstream. And she's like, yeah, I don't really like that. I don't like the spotlight. I just want to play basketball. So how does this she grapple with like this need for privacy and kind of like independence with like the league's need for like being in the spotlight and making more money and getting in front of more fans and that sort of thing.
Nice. I love hearing about people writing TV shows because I'm a massive TV nerd and movie nerd and everything, as you might know. And I just yeah, I love hearing about people having these great ideas and just making them come to life. So that's awesome. What's it like, by the way, as well, to go to a film festival and kind of bring your movie around different places? How does that feel whenever you see a crowd watching it for the first time?
Oh man, it's so nerve-wracking. Or at least the first couple times it was. I think it's gotten better with every one that I've attended because now I can relax and be like, okay, this is one of many films that they're probably seeing for the first time.
Mm,
So a lot of their reactions are genuine, and every silence, every laugh, every like aha moment is just feedback
mm,
for what parts of the story resonated with them and what parts of the story I maybe could have done better by. Um, I think overall it was very beautiful to see people's reactions to it in person. I think film festivals are such a special experience, not just for indie filmmakers, but for audiences as well.
mm,
And so it's been really good. I have no complaints about it. You know, getting to meet other filmmakers, getting to see what other films were accepted, how film curators look at a slate of films and how they relate to each other has been really cool. So just learning more about the film process has been cool.
nice. Quick question about your bio. So you talk about being a film creator, but you also say you like to cycle. So tell me about that. So how did you get into cycling, and what role does that kind of play in terms of maybe how you relax and free up your mind to be creative?
Yeah, I'm going for a bike ride later today.
Nice.
I think I got into it like most people get into it, like as a kid who just has a really, really big desire for skint kneecaps. And then, we have a really great, in my hometown, it's a really great trail called the Riverwalk. So it goes, as you might imagine, along a river. And it's really fun. It's really beautiful. A lot of people ride bikes, run, walk their dogs, walk their kids out there. And I've moved back home, so I'm getting to enjoy that again. When I went away to college, Birmingham, Alabama is very mountainous. And so a lot of the people that, pretty much the only people that rode bikes when I moved to Birmingham were people who were like very serious cyclists, the people who were like bike messengers and things like that, who are used to weaving in and out of traffic and like
Mm,
pushing themselves to go up mountains and stuff like that in a way that I was not. You know, the Riverwalk is fairly flat in comparison to Birmingham.
mm,
And Birmingham didn't have a lot of like bike infrastructure. So for me, I kind of got away from it. I was like, actually, it's faster for me to walk and way less stressful. So I'm just gonna not do this cycling thing. But my parents definitely offered. They're like, "Do you want your bike up here? It'd be great." I'm like, "No, I don't want to get hit by a car. Thank you, though."
thank you.
So yes, I got away from it. I moved to Durham, North Carolina, which is a little more flat and has tons of separated bike infrastructure. And I was working with a nonprofit doing video and photo. Um, and so I was like, you know what would make my job easier if I had a bike so I could like keep up with all these runners and I could move faster. I could get to different locations on the trail faster to set up different shots
Mm,
and explore different areas for we could do interviews. Like having a bike for my job at that time made a lot of sense. And so I
mm,
invested in a bike at the worst time to reinvest in a bike, which is during the pandemic when everybody wants to be outside on a bike.
of
And it was
course.
very expensive and hard to find a bike in my size. But that's how I got back into it. And after I stopped working with that nonprofit, I just kind of stuck with it. And I'm training for a 50-mile ride in May. So
Wow.
that's where we are.
Awesome. Brilliant. Good luck with that. That's awesome. I want to ask as well about so something else you mentioned in your bio. You said that you build visual storytelling brands. I think you mentioned that. So what does that look like for you? What does that actually mean? What is a visual storytelling brand?
Yeah, so I would consider Melanin MVP my second visual storytelling brand. Honey and Hustle and Please Hustle Responsibly, that's kind of like one brand family.
Mm,
And to be a visual storytelling brand, there has to be something visual. I actually personally consider email a visual medium.
Mm.
At least the way I do it, I add a lot of links, I add a lot of photos, I sometimes embed videos or other links. Um, the podcast started as a video podcast. This is a very visual medium. Melanin MVP, at least I was smart enough to put the newsletter and the podcast under the same name. So that's another separate visual storytelling brand specifically about women's sports. So that's a very distinct audience separate from Please Hustle Responsibly and Honey and Hustle.
Mm.
And in terms of developing that and determining I was willing to spend time on curating this brand, a lot of it came down to the timing. It came down to what I felt I uniquely had to say about women's sports and women athletes and the stories I wanted to share in that space. And
Mm.
so that was kind of the impetus for starting a new brand in 2024.
Okay, nice. Um, for anyone listening to this who has a publication on Substack or a newsletter, or if they just write in general, how important do you think story is when it comes to really establishing a brand or a newsletter? Because some people, they don't really bring story into the equation at all. They just kind of write about a topic and then that's it. But how do you, first of all, how do you kind of weave your story into stuff if you're writing things, and then how can other people maybe do that then as well?
Yeah, I think when I was using Substack, Substack did a really good job of like highlighting a featured post.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of people underutilize that space. They probably put what the numbers told them was their most popular article there, or maybe they put an article that they felt was the best example of their writing. And those aren't bad things. But I also think you could really use that landing page space if you're going to have a featured post to tell a story of like why someone should stay specifically here, specifically for you, specifically for this publication. And I think using that space is really important, not just using the about page. The about page is cool, but having a space where people could dive deeper into why this publication, why you, why now.
Hmm.
As much as you may want to hide behind your work, and trust me, I've been there, and just let the work speak for itself. The reality is there are just a lot of people putting out amazing work on Substack
Hmm.
that really isn't that unusual. But there's not a lot of people saying, well, this is why this work is so important to me, and this is why I'm willing to spend hours a week writing these things. This is why I'm willing to spend obscene amount of time writing Substack notes to connect with more people who might like my writing. I think that matters in many cases more than the writing itself because inevitably there are going to be times when you don't feel like it, and you don't feel like writing something. There are going to be times when you wish you had more time to do another round of editing. There are going to be times when maybe events pertaining to your industry or your topic or your niche really would benefit from your expressed perspective, even if that isn't what you originally planned to write about that day or that week. And I think having a guiding principle of like what you care about specifically as it relates to the topic and what your ethos is specifically as it relates to a topic are really guiding forces in how you plan to serve your audience through your writing. So I
Hmm.
think story from that perspective is really important and is not just for your writers, for your readers, but also for you as the writer, so that you know what your North Star is whenever you write an article.
Mm, great advice. I agree. Yeah, I think people just don't use story enough, and they're afraid to share what they think is maybe mundane about their lives or it's not that interesting. But often those are the things I think that connect best with readers. You know, they just hear that you've been through the same kind of thing that they've been through, and they want to see how you managed to deal with it or anything like that. I think it just builds so much connection and loyalty, I think, with an audience whenever they can read your story. So I love that that's your approach and that's the way you're sort of advocating other people do it as well. Love that. Um, what about your, I'll ask you two more questions. What about your sort of plans for the future then, Angela? So where do you kind of see things going over the next few years for yourself? What would you like to achieve in the next, say, 3 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. And definitely something I couldn't answer when I first started because I was just like, I just want to be a photographer and a filmmaker. But definitely things have grown since then.
Mm.
I think right now, my greatest wish, which for many people probably still sounds like a pipe dream, is just like to be able to make money from my own work.
Mm.
And that's what every fiber of my being is working toward right now. I am in the process of developing products. I started with paid subscriptions on Substack. And I was like, okay, this feels like a lot of work to maintain and upkeep and grow. Um, and while I appreciate people being willing to pay for my work. I also want to feel good about the value that they're getting in return. And the
Mhm.
reality is that anything I write, I want anybody to be able to read.
Yeah.
Um, and the other half of that is, okay, if I'm not going to do paid subscriptions, then what am I doing? So I'm in the process of developing a print magazine version of the newsletter. I think
Nice.
that's going to be really fun. We're in the process of hopefully doing some in-person events. We have one scheduled for August, which I'm excited about. Hopefully doing maybe one or two more this year. I would love to do more events,
Mm.
more curated events, and not just like boring networking events, but maybe like some dinner parties where it's a little more casual. You're getting together over a meal, you're talking, you're sharing, you're meeting other great people who are doing other great things, and hopefully you collaborate or they
Mm.
recommend you for something and you form this really great organic connection with someone who you have a shared interest with and we'll continue to support down the line because we all need support as entrepreneurs and creators.
Mm.
Um, and hopefully developing some more digital products. Those have been harder than I would like to admit to sell, but it does feel good to put in a lot of effort to make something good and just know that whenever it does sell, that someone is going to get value out of that. So those are kind of the three buckets I'm looking at. Sponsorship has also been hard, but we've been doing a lot of outreach. We've had a couple of interesting meetings and hoping to grow that piece of the pie as well. But that's
Mm.
probably to a lesser extent because I just know the reality of like working with brands and I don't want to give myself another boss. If anybody's going to be my boss, it's going to be my audience. So
Brilliant. I love that so much. Yeah, I love that. And everything you said there, it's so people centric. It's so like face to face, like real kind of stuff. And I really do think that it sounds so stupid to say real kind of stuff, but you know what I mean? Everything's, I think, moving more towards that human connection now more than ever, because I think we've been through a phase of everything being very automatic and routine and distant, and now people really want that connection again. So I love hearing that somebody else is doing podcasts in person, and they want to do events and they want to make a print magazine, which is incredible. I love that so much. What a great idea. But yeah, Angela, it's amazing. I love this conversation. I'm fascinated by what you're going to be doing as a filmmaker as well. I'm definitely going to follow that and see what you've got in the pipeline. Can you leave our listeners and our watchers just with a sort of a final golden nugget of advice from maybe something that you've realized being a writer and a creator, or maybe a filmmaker as well?
yeah, the first couple things you make are going to be shit. So like don't worry about that. Even if you think they're like the bee's knees and they're the best thing you've ever written or created in your life, I guarantee you're going to look back in a year and be like, wow, I cannot believe anybody is still subscribed to my newsletter. And you know what? That's okay because everything that you're doing, everything that you're publishing, it's about putting a drop in the bucket of like what you want to see more of in the world, number one. And it's about creating a body of work that you can be proud of over time. I now am to a point where I will reference previous articles that I've written and will hyperlink them to give people a daisy chain to go down. And I think if we think about our work not as just these one-off things that we did because we thought they were cool or we thought they would gain us more subscribers or more paid subscribers or they would get picked up by the New York Times or whoever because our writing is just so good they have to feature us. And we looked at it more as like this is a body of work for a specific group of people that I think will benefit year after year after year from this. And yes, the first couple things are going to be crap, but I got to make some crappy things to learn what they like and learn what I like and learn how to make things better according to my taste and my style and my preferences. And I think when you look at it like that, it becomes a lot less stressful because it becomes a lot less about what am I doing today and more about what have I done this month or this year or this past 6 months to move me towards that goal of creating something that's really beautiful that I can be proud of. So take the pressure off yourself, chill, relax. It's okay. You're not late. You're not making shit 100% of the time, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, what a great way to finish. Another one of your truth bombs, which is a brilliant way to end the chat. But yeah, Angela, it's so good to talk to you today about this. I think this has been super valuable for anyone who is interested in film or podcasting or just being on Substack in general. And I love your approach to things. And anyone who's listening to this, obviously I will link to Angela's publication in the post, and you can check it out and subscribe and follow what she's doing. Angela, thank you so much for your time, and hope you really enjoy your cycle later today.
Thank you so much.